Our next panel discussion we have is the federal, state, and tribal relationships, intersection, and jurisdiction. This is part 1 of 3 of our each morning. So we're focusing in on the federal. Tomorrow will be the state, and the last day will be the tribal section. But so with that, the goal of this panel is to focus in more on the EPA's program and jurisdiction impacting tribes. This session will include how EPA is working to reduce administrative burdens for tribal interactions with EPA as well as other federal agencies. And so I have a few questions that I'm going to moderate here, and then we'll have some, if you have any questions, but really this is a time for us to kind of understand a little bit more about EPA's role with the tribes. And so the first one is for every panelist here is, what is the moment in your career that you were most proud of where it intersected with tribes? What would you like the audience to know about your work with tribes? Jane, do you want to start us off?
Yes. So my office is the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. So I often get the question, why does my office have jurisdiction over both tribes and international? And so my response is that my office is responsible for the relationships that we have with sovereign nations, both within the United States and recognizing the sovereignty of tribal nations, as well as the sovereignty of nations outside the United States. One of the things that I did not talk about, but I'm going to take this opportunity, is that intersection between international and tribal issues, because it is particularly prevalent here in Region 10, and that's the transboundary pollution issues that many of the tribal nations see from pollution, particularly in British Columbia or from Canada. And so having the ability to both raise the indigenous concerns with our counterparts in Canada or Mexico or in other countries has really been very important. Another area in terms of transboundary mining, of the flip side, is Canada is now expanding, obviously, its mineral development, particularly to address the new green energy push for electric vehicles. And what my office is trying to do is to remind both the federal agencies who are pushing for that critical mineral development, as well as our Canadian counterparts, about the water quality impacts associated with mineral development and how it impacts tribal resources and tribal lands and water quality. Another area is in the Arctic. For those of you who are in Alaska, we know now that there is major development in the Arctic, both in terms of the development of minerals, as well as the transport and the waste management of minerals. Casey already talked about the ANCSA. We don't want to see more ANCSA, more contamination as we develop the Arctic.
Thanks, Jane. I think I'll just expand a little bit about my role at EPA. As Jane mentioned earlier, she's the Assistant Administrator for the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. My office, the American Indian Environmental Office, is located within OIDA, which is the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. I think my role I would probably best describe as a traffic cop, as a town crier, as emergency management, but I serve as first and foremost as the liaison between the EPA and tribes and tribal governments. I think that's first and foremost the biggest role of my job. But then secondarily, I communicate tribal issues between EPA and the rest of the federal agencies. The White House Council on Native American Affairs is, I think, one of the best tools that we have, both in the Obama administration, now again in this administration, to ensure that The administration is doing the best work that we can for Indian country. And then the third tier of what I do is making sure that I'm the liaison between Indian country and all of EPA's national programs, whether it's water, whether it's chemical safety, whether it's air, and ensure that there's a tribal voice in all of those national programs. And just ensuring that a native voice is being represented. So I say traffic cop because I'm kind of, intersecting all of these different things between EPA, between the administration, between Indian country. So I kind of see that as my role. I'm sorry, I think I got a little bit lost. I think the question was something that we've worked on. Yeah.
What would the audience, what would you like the audience to know about your tribes?
Okay. And I think that's a very good question because I think it's my entire career I'm very proud of. I've spent my entire career working with Indian country from the first moment I got a job with Senator Johnson's office from South Dakota in 2004. I've been working on Indian issues ever since then, whether in the Senate or for the administration. I think one thing that I would like to highlight is when I worked for the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, back in 2012. I was working on Indian education issues at the time. And I was approached by a tribal director for a child care development program from one of the bands of Ojibwe in Minnesota. And she had indicated that they had some trouble constructing new child care facilities, and that there was a barrier in statute in the federal law that wouldn't allow a tribe to reduce services to childcare programs while constructing. They couldn't construct a new building because they couldn't reduce their services temporarily to divert resources to constructing a new facility. And she asked what I could do to help. And we ended up changing 7 words in statute to allow childcare centers across Indian country to be built, temporarily reducing services. And I didn't think about anything about it. We changed the 7 words. And about 3 or 4 years later, I ran into this tribal director again in the cafeteria in the Senate. And she told me that they were able to construct 35 to 40 more tribal childcare centers throughout Indian country. And I think you don't sometimes think about the impact of what you're doing. And so I was just incredibly happy with that. There were 40 more childcare centers throughout Indian country because of 7 words that we changed in statute. So I think of all of the things that I do throughout my career, and I take that back, and even the little things that we do in these jobs, I think help us. So every change that I get to make in Indian country for the better makes me proud as a tribal citizen, but also as a federal employee. So that's just a one little thing that I think I'd bring up as something I'm most proud of, and that I in my interactions with Indian country.
I've spent most of my career working with tribes outside of government, and helping to sort of every day trying to make sure that we're getting in front of decision makers, telling our story, talking about solutions, talking about challenges that we're facing. And so now to find myself in a role where I am a decision maker is, I'm trying to reflect back. I've spent a lot of time reflecting back on those years of, pounding on doors and climbing through windows to try to get to just to be heard and to be seen. And so one of the things that I really enjoy about my current responsibility is to actually go to communities as a decision maker and listen and engage directly. And I did that last fall. I went up to the Bristol Bay region as we were looking at what our next step may or may not be on our Clean Water Act 404C termination, and to actually go from village to village and with no agenda except to listen and to say, I'm a decision maker and I'm here and I want to hear what you have to say. And, not every village I went to supported our decision. And so it was, for me, I think, those opportunities to go out and engage directly with tribes, to take my team with me to do that, to empower them and encourage them to make sure that they are listening to tribal leaders and that they themselves see themselves as advocates in our decision making. in our rulemaking, in how we do grants. And so for me, it really is, sort of in the spirit of Gadugi is something that we say in Cherokee of how we come together as one to solve problems. And so for me, that is really a blessing. And I'm very fortunate to have that opportunity.
Thank you, Casey. So our next question is more focused for Jane. What is your agency doing to attract, hire, and retain more Native American employees?
Thank you for that. Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Under EPA and under Administrator Regan, we have very much focus on diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, or DIA. And so with that as a guiding principle and a directive for the agency, we recently signed an MOU with the American Indian Higher Education Commission. And so we are now working with AHAC to work with TCUs in terms of educating them as to what the opportunities are at EPA for employment, as well as to provide them internships. So this summer, our office, the Office for International and Tribal Affairs, are going to have 3 tribal interns work with us in the hopes that we will expose them, teach them, share with them some of the great opportunities that there is to work at EPA. In addition, Kenneth and I will be speaking next week. We'll be going to the Society for American Indians Government Employees, or SAGE, and where we will also be talking with SAGE members again about opportunities for not only employment, but also how do we not only get more Native Americans into the agency, but how do we promote Native Americans within the institution so that we have more Caseys and more Kenneths at the table, so they are not only represented at the agency, but also represented as senior leaders.
We're going to open it up to a few questions. If anybody has any questions so far, Adam is running the microphone around. It's nice to have distinguished guests here to be able to be with us.
Good morning, and yes, thank you. And I'm Donna Thompson. I'm the vice chair for the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, and welcome to our homelands, as earlier stated. But it's really good to see the 3 of you up there, because we have 2 super sites here on our reservation, and that we have been working and trying to get them cleaned up for the last 20 years. And so I'm hoping that, based on your conversations and what's going to be down the pipe, that I can see that happening in my lifetime. We've lived with unclean water, unclean air. And when you go to the game line, which I hope all of you are, you will see, why we animately fight for the remediation of that area. And also, if you're able to see the FMC site, you will see again why we adamantly want that cleaned up. So thank you. And I look forward to hearing from you for the next year.
Good morning, Jason Walker, Northwestern Band, Shoshone Nation, Region 8, RTOC Chair. I really did like your opening statements, Jane, about the fiduciary responsibility that EPA has. And I hope there are regional folks listening to that, because that needs to filter down to our regions. I think when we go to RTOC meetings, and this is a forum, you've heard it yesterday where it's not all roses. There's some comments that you need to hear. But then I think again, that needs to be heard from the region, because some of our regional folks, and I'm not just talking about my region, but they need to know that they have that responsibility and to listen to us. And if we have issues or problems, and I do really appreciate you coming out here, all 3 of you, because this is huge. This is something we want to do in Region 8. To have our administrator come out our assistant administrator, or, not only not only our program managers, but the guys who actually can send that voice up or do something about our issues. We do have a lot of tribes that when they come to these things, they just, pound and pound. They're like Mr. Tyler there, years and decades of talking about, come to my place, help me with my Superfund sites. We have tribes like that in our region also. And it seems like, the squeakiest one gets the oil, and it shouldn't be that. It should be across the board. If you have issues, let's get them addressed. But I appreciate you doing that and listening to my words and to your recruitment. I think we can do better than Casey and Kenneth. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I agree with that.
One thing I did want to mention is that we are bringing back, I think you are familiar, we had in the Obama administration a training program that was mandatory for all EPA employees, who was called Working Effectively with Tribal Governments. So we are now bringing that program back. And one of the items that we will include including consultation will be the federal trust responsibilities. So just to let you know.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you all for coming here. It does mean a lot to have Jane, Kenneth, and Casey here with us today. We advocate monthly at our RTOC meetings and at our NTOC meetings about bringing these issues forward, and then going to the DC level and speaking with Jane and Casey's there, and AIEO. Kenneth, you'll be there when we come out again. But it's all the tribal nations coming together, advocating and connecting, kind of like with the same theme that we have, and bringing it. It took us 20 years to finally get the 404C determination. We're the 14th watershed to get that. And I wanted to say a big thank you for that, because that is a big deal. And it does take beating on those doors. 404C was the light at the end of the tunnel, as long as our tribal leaders say back at home, of to protect our water. But while these guys are here, and while EPA employees are also here, take advantage of having those conversations with what are your concerns in your area. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to you guys, and I'm happy with Kenneth and Casey. Jason.
So one thing I might mention, in addition to what Gayla said, I think this is the first RTOC that we've had with Casey's staff, his senior staff. I don't remember having the decision makers in one meeting, and so we were able to meet with everybody there, and it was just nice to be able to learn a little bit more about the Seattle office. And if I've had a lot of questions just as an RTOC representative of well, where's our connection with their staff? I mean, if this is really truly a partnership, and how we try to protect the environment, how do we, if they're never here, how do we do this? So that was a big deal for us to have your staff present and learning a little bit more what their issues were.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And if I could just give a shout out to Andrew Baca, who oversees our tribal and NEPA program, who is here today. Adam Barron, who works and oversees our tribal program as well. Calvin Torada, who's here as well as the head of our Superfund and emergency management division. So, we've got, as Aaron said, very senior folks here who wake up every day trying to figure out, again, how we're moving that boulder up the hill. So please take advantage of those folks being here, and other members of our tribal trust and tribal branch are here. I see so much Michelle Davis is here, and Kathy's here. So there's a lot of folks here that are problem solvers. So please take advantage of them being here.
Okay, we have one more question here. Are there efforts within your agency to reduce administrative burden for tribes in securing federal funds? So maybe.
Well, and I think, I'm going to defer to Jane, but I think we both talked about the training technical assistance centers to help with tribes, but I'm going to defer to Jane for further response.
See, and I was trying to defer to Kenneth because what I was going to talk about was GAP. As you all know, and it was highlighted, I think, in several of the comments, the General Assistance Program is so important to the tribes in terms of capacity building, but we also know that there were administrative burdens associated with GAP. So we took in OIDA and under Kenneth's office over a year in which we consulted with the tribes, consulted with the regions to try to improve and streamline the GAP program. So there was a new GAP guidance that went out last year. We look forward to hearing your comments. It's perhaps not perfect. We understand that, but we want to continue to work with you to improve the program so that it can both address the needs that you are seeing in terms of your tribal nations, as well as obviously supporting EPA's mission to protect Indian country.
Maybe we have one time for one more question before we let these guys down off the podium here. Go ahead.
There was just a question about the acronyms that were being used. So GAP, was that the one that was, okay, so that's the American Indian General Assistance Program. So that's one of the primary funding vehicles for EPA out to the tribes. Got one over here.
Millie Hall, Native Village in Kivalina, in Alaska. I guess we're gonna do some dancing. That better? Okay. As a tribal administrator, I have a hard time keeping employees in the office. Hard time filling open positions, mostly because the pay is not competitive. I lose people to the local mine or other places that offer higher pay. And I'm speaking on behalf of the EPA IGAP fund. I appreciate the little increase that we got this year, but that amount that we get each year only covers 1 person and a half. And the groundwork that's required to do the work in rural Alaska is very, what do you call it, manpower. You have to use a lot of people to get one thing done. So I want to advocate for the EPA GAP program funding that you consider increasing it to hire at least 2 full-time people, not just 1.5.
Yeah, and I guess I'll take the first stab at that. I think, and Casey and Jane touched on a little bit of this earlier about Jane was asked the question about improving retention and recruitment of Native Americans at EPA, but also we need to improve resources on the tribal side to ensure that we are recruiting and retaining a lot of our employees that we have working for our tribal programs. Casey mentioned earlier about working with headquarters and working with our partners in Congress to ensure that we are doing all that we can to increase work resources for EPA and specifically for the GAP program. I think one of the things I always say is that a rising tide floats all boats. So if we're increasing resources, we're going to be able to make the programs better. And we need to look internally too, Jane mentioned the improvements to the GAP program about streamlining and being more effective with our dollar. But I think with the added efforts to secure more funding, I think we'll be able to get to what we need to be doing. But I definitely hear you, making sure that we have all of that institutional knowledge of employees that have worked on these programs for so long. Losing them is a huge loss to these programs. So I hear you, and yeah, we'll continue to work on that to make sure that we're increasing resources for the program. I don't know if anyone wanted to add to that.
All right.
My name is Casey Six Killer.
Well, let's give the panel a hand, please. Let's give applause. Thank you.